Okay, so in this one, I want to go over a bit of stuff that I wasn't really thinking too consciously about in the process of making this, but it's been a few days now, and after kind of looking at it for a bit and thinking about what I was doing, there's some stuff about the composition, especially that I want to go over that was kind of more subconscious that I wasn't talking about too much during the actual process. When I started doing digital art, not just Blender, but like digital art in the first place at all, I was like 11 years old, and I was using this Photoshop app on my phone. I think it was called Photoshop Express, if anyone knows what that is. So I was making digital art, but it wasn't good. You know, I was 11. So one day, my parents actually got me a camera for my birthday. So I started learning photography, and I probably went out like 100 times with that. And I started going out and shooting, and I'd go downtown with friends, or just go out by myself. I did that a lot, and I got pretty deep into it, and obviously learned how to control all the settings and everything. But more importantly, after going out that many times and taking thousands and thousands of photos, and like comparing all of those to photographers that I was following online at the time, and analyzing their work and trying to get my stuff to look as close to theirs as possible. I think I was older than 11 at this point, but I was still pretty young. But yeah, I was going pretty deep on photography, and like after doing it that much, there's some things that I learned about composition that I apply to my stuff all the time now, and that I applied specifically to this one, which I'll talk about in here. So let's just talk about some stuff that I was thinking about kind of subconsciously while I was making this, but still that I learned from that time. So if you think about what photography is, it's just the art of capturing stuff that's already there. In most cases, like I guess product photography and stuff like that, it's different, where you're just kind of manipulating a scene yourself. But in terms of like environment photography, like street photography or landscape or whatever, you're not like creating a place like we are in 3D, right? You're just finding something, and then a lot of the times the place doesn't actually look that amazing, but it's the art of like capturing it in a way that when you look at it in a 2D image, it looks good. So that's what it is. It's and you're doing the same thing here in Blender, just with a virtual version of that. Except we also get the bonus of we get to create the place in the first place. So yeah, if you haven't learned photography, I don't think it's necessary, but I think at least learning about like camera settings and learning like hearing photographers talk about the way they compose their shots, I think that's very important. So I'll do that a little bit here with this one. Okay, so the first thing is the position that the camera is actually placed in on the ground. If you just think about the height that the camera is off of the ground, and I've talked about this before, but I'll do it again here just to be extra clear. If you think about the height that the camera was placed off of the ground here, it's only like a couple of feet, if not like less, off the ground. I would say it seems like it's like a 2 or 3 feet off the ground here maybe, in terms of like the distance from the floor to where the camera would be. So it's not like way up high. It's not like, it doesn't look like somebody took a picture of this from a balcony or from like a flying perspective or drone shot. It looks like they were on the ground taking a picture, like standing or kneeling. So what that does is a couple of things. One is it gives you a more interesting sense of scale sometimes, in terms of just like, sometimes if you take a picture of something head on, like if the camera was at the level, like the height level of the middle of this propeller maybe, and you just took a picture head on, it might not have the same impact in terms of scale, just because in this composition here where the camera is low to the ground, now we have this giant thing that's kind of just looming way over us in terms of our perspective. If you are on the same level or above the thing that you're taking a picture of, sometimes, not always, but sometimes the scale just doesn't hit as hard as if you're like kind of taking it from low down close to the ground, and then this massive thing is kind of looming over you in the composition. So that's one of the reasons I love this camera angle. It's just because if you have this massive thing that's just towering over you, it just makes the viewer, like you looking at the picture here, feel so much smaller, and the thing you're looking at feel so much bigger. That's not always the case, but a lot of the times it is. So this is one of the reasons I often will put the camera close to the ground like this. The other thing it does is when you have the camera close to the ground, like I said, it's kind of as if the person who was taking this picture was like maybe a buddy with like this dude right here, or like exploring this place for the first time, or just somebody walking around in this place, and then it's kind of like they just, you know, walked out of some passageway or something and then just stumbled across this massive thing, and I'm like, oh wow, I gotta take a picture. Boom, snapped it right there. That's kind of the vibe of this camera angle that I was going for. It's like, I think you can only really understand what that feels like if you've gone out with your friends and done like street photography or landscape photography or something, and you go out and you find something that actually looks really cool and you have to just stop right there and just get a cool shot of it. That's kind of the vibe I'm going for, is like as if you were exploring this abandoned place for the first time and you just found this thing and just took a picture right there. So those are the two things that it does when you have the camera at this type of angle, like close to the ground looking up, is it kind of puts you and makes you feel more like you're actually there, or like was taken by somebody who was actually there. And also it just gives you sometimes a more interesting sense of scale, because it makes it feel like this thing is just towering over you and you're just tiny. The other thing that I want to talk about is like just visual balance in terms of like looking at it in a 2D image. So sometimes, like when you're working in 3D, sometimes it's easy to forget about the fact that the final product that everyone else is going to see is not actually a 3D scene that they can rotate and spin around in. It's just a 2D image that they're going to see, right? So like the thing that you post online or the thing you show to people is not usually the blend file. It's usually a 2D image, like a rendered image, just a PNG that you can't like move around in. So I think getting the visual balance of things and getting a nice 2D image result from your 3D environment is like the most important thing. If you can get, you know, if the final image looks good, that's really all that matters. As long as, you know, if you're doing like game development or like game design or something like that, then yeah, obviously you need the 3D environment to work. But in terms of what we're doing here, just creating images or creating video, the only thing that matters in this case is like what the 2D PNG looks like when everything's done. So versus like what the 3D scene actually looks like when you rotate around, if that makes sense. Let's talk about why I put certain parts of this in certain areas of the frame. So what I mean is, like, if you look at the positioning of this fan, for example, how this is positioned in our 2D frame right here, that is like probably the biggest thing that I was thinking about when I was doing this in terms of like composing the shot. So if you look at this circle, this big fan blade, which is like the main, I would say it's like the main like part of this image. If you look at where this is like placed in our 2D frame, it's right smack in the middle. So you don't always have to do that. You can put it in other parts of it. But that's what I was thinking when I was choosing, like when I'm rotating the camera around, when I'm choosing to put this into my shot, where am I locating it in terms of like where it is in the 2D image? It's like I want it to be balanced out left and right somewhat. And it's not exact. You can see it's not the exact same distance, but just having somewhat of a balance in these areas, I find that always just makes it look, not always, but most of the time, just makes it look a lot nicer if it's just visually balanced left and right. And the same thing with the top and bottom too. Like if you look at the distance from here, like this distance here and this distance here from like the bottom of where this circle is and like the top of this circle, just this fan right here, it's somewhat balanced out top and bottom too. Like the fan isn't way up here or way down here. It's just right in the middle, balanced out from like I'm thinking about it more in like a 2D sense versus a 3D rendering sense. Like I'm literally just talking about the distance in pixels from like this point to this point in the image and like this point to this point in the image. And I think it's important to think about it that way. Like think in 2D sometimes, even though we're doing 3D art, thinking about it in 2D, because like I said, that 2D image is what everyone else is going to see. They're not going to see your 3D file, or they're not going to be able to rotate around. That's what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about like visual balance, is like, is it balanced out up and down, and is it balanced out left and right? And that goes for not just the fan in the middle, but everything too. Like there's all this shadow right here, and then it's balanced out on the other side with an equal or like similar amount of shadow. So you don't always have to do that, but in shots like this, it just makes sense versus if it's like cropped in like this, or, you know, this, it just doesn't feel balanced. Like if you look at, it's like there's this light section, but then there's shadow here. Like this section is now shadow, but then it's not quite balanced on this side where it's like this is now, like this area is so much smaller than this area over here, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's just trying to find something that just looks balanced when you look at it in 2D. And one tip I can give you to do that somewhat easily is just zoom out. And you can do that in Blender, and you can do that in Photoshop too when you're editing it. I think you actually saw me in the process, like zoom way out like this and crop it afterwards because it wasn't quite balanced. But you can also do that in Blender. You just scroll out, like when you have your camera view like rendering here, you just do the same thing. You just scroll out and look at it from like far back like this. It's kind of like if you squint your eyes and just look at it, is the overall thing, like, are the overall areas of dark and light balanced out? Is it all looking good from like way back here with my eyes squinted and the image is blurry? Yeah, balance things out. And there's other ways to do it too. Like it's still possible to have it balanced using like the rule of thirds, not necessarily using this to balance it, but like using the same concepts. If you're using the rule of thirds, like having visual balance on both sides. I found a really good video by Blender Guru. He just kind of took all this stuff and put it into very clear and concise words. So I'd recommend, I'll just link the video here if you want to go a bit more in depth into like composition and how that applies to 3D rendering. Blender Guru did a really, really good video on that, so I'll just link that there. The other thing I want to talk about, which he actually covers in this video, but there's a clear example of it right here, contrasting areas of high detail and low detail. So what I mean is, like, I would say an area like this, if we just take my brush back, something like this, if you just look at in this box that I just drew, the amount of detail in here is a lot. So there's like wires, there's particles, pipes, scaffolding, stairs under the scaffolding, pipes mixed in with it. Like it's just stuff on stuff on stuff. Just tons and tons of stuff happening in detail. It's just a lot of chaos like layered on top of each other. So if the image was just that, like if you imagine like if this image was purely just pipes and stairs and wires and all this detail, it would just be too much to look at. Like you would see it and you'd be like, oh my God, I don't even know what I'm looking at. It's just all complexity. And the opposite is true if you have like just simple shapes. Like if it was just the fan and there was no detail around it, it would just be kind of boring. If it was just like the fan and the floor, that's what it looks like at the very beginning when you're just starting. Like if you look at the first part of the process, it was, you know, blocking out the scene, putting on a texture, and it was just that. It was just all big, simple shapes, which are all easy to look at, but if you just have simple shapes, it's pretty boring in the end. So finding a nice balance of simplicity and complexity and then contrasting those right next to each other. There's something about that that's just really nice to look at. Just to be extra clear, like this I would say would be like an area of simplicity, or even somewhat maybe the floor here. But if you just look at the amount of empty space, just keeping it easy to look at is the main thing. And then when you have that thing that's easy to look at right next to this like complex thing that would be kind of hard to look at if it was everything, that is what, like I said, there's just something about that just is very pleasing to look at. I guess I should talk about the focal length as well. I forget what the exact focal length was. I think it was 24 millimeters, but I should double check it. I'm not gonna check. I'm pretty sure it's 24 millimeters. If it's not, it's like slightly wider. The default lens in Blender is 50 millimeters. If you don't know what like this means, if you don't know what I'm talking about with millimeters, it's just the amount of zoom. I'll actually open this up and show you. Okay, so this is just a default scene with an HDRI in here. What I mean when I'm saying like millimeters and focal length is this setting right here. So by default, your camera has a 50 millimeter lens on it, which means it's going to be this amount of zoom right here. And you can see if you change that, it's just the amount of like how zoomed in or zoomed out it is. So I think in this one, it was roughly a 24 millimeter lens. And I switched it to panoramic and I added a little bit of distortion, but it's so subtle that it's like not important for this discussion. But it was roughly 24 millimeters, which is this, you know, this zoomed out. It's kind of similar to like the focal length on your phone. It might not be exact, but it's like roughly in that range. Something like 16 millimeters is going to be pretty wide. And then you can see past that, it's just like super, super wide angle. And that's when you're going to start getting like a lot of distortion like this. So 24 is a nice range where it's like wide, but the amount of distortion you get isn't like too insane that it looks weird. But you can still like, it's nice. It's a nice like zoomed out perspective. So that's what I chose for this one because, you know, it's gonna change like so much depending on the thing that you're trying to capture. It just seemed to work best for this space. Like we're in, you know, a big warehouse type of thing, so we don't want to be like super up close on something because I want to capture the big empty vastness of this space. So zooming out seemed like the right thing to do. If you're wondering about exact settings, yeah, 24 millimeters ish. You could also do 16. I'm sure it would look good if you want like a wider shot. But I wanted to be kind of more up close on this thing, so that was that. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this one. So I will see you in the next one.